Good day, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Adrias. We thank you for joining us today. We are very honored to welcome back to Seekers of Meaning, Rabbi Lance Sussman, who's emeritus rabbi from Knesset Israel in Elkins Park, one of the, well, let's just be honest, probably the leading expert in American Jewish history. And the author of a brand new book, part 2 of what is going to be a 3-part series. This book is called Portrait of a Reform Rabbi, Continuity and Change. Continuity and Change. It comes high on the heels of Volume 1, Portrait of an American Rabbi in his own words. There's so much to unpack. Lance, and full disclosure, I've known Lance for a few years. So it's really good to see you, Lance. I'm glad to see you're well, and welcome to a return visit to Seekers of Meaning. How you doing?
I'm great, and thanks for inviting me. It's wonderful to be with you again.
And I hope the family's well, and
we're great. We just had a simcha, our youngest.
Oh, that's right. You had a wedding recently, right?
Yeah, this Saturday night, our youngest child got married, and I officiated. And that is a double blessing. So.
Oh, wow. That's really, well, mazel tov. That's a highlight. That's really a highlight. So this is Volume 2. You're working on Volume 3 right now, correct?
I just finished it.
So I got to ask you, before we get into some of the substance thing, what was your thinking about putting all this, a huge amount of material? Walk me through real fast the motivation or the thinking about putting about 3 separate volumes together around some of your writings, your blogs, your work, your sermons. How did that come about? That's a lot of work.
Well, as you know, I've had a 2-track career,
right?
Both in the pulpit and in academia. And for the last 20-some years, my primary work has been in the pulpit. But I never desisted from my academic work. So I, like any professor, was pumping out information, writing and publishing, speaking. And I wanted a way to bring my work together early in my retirement. The model for me went back to my rabbinic thesis in Cincinnati, where I studied the sermons of Rabbi Isaac Leeser, who put together 20, 30 years of sermons into multiple volumes. And I said to myself, well, he can do it. I can do it. So I wanted to make sure early in my retirement, or at least retirement from the pulpit, I gathered the material that I had produced that was spread all over the place, Reform publications, history publications, newspapers, and that there would be a permanent record for the future, for some personal gratification, obviously, can't deny that, but also that if anybody is interested in early 21st century Judaism, they would be able to reference the work of a trained Ph.D. observer of American Jewish life. So I had a managing editor and went through the work. It was a tremendous amount of work, both editing and managerial, administratively, legally. And we collected so much material that a single book wouldn't do. So we came up with categories: congregational work, history of reform, and general Jewish history, with an emphasis on America. And that produced 3 volumes that came to a total of about 1,500 pages.
Yeah, these are amazing. And you mentioned the beginning part of the new one, continuity and change. For our colleagues out there, or educators, is a really wonderful, concise compendium summary of liberal Judaism, Reform Judaism, in case you want to, when you get the book, use that as an adult education format. this book seems to be a lot of collective writings and blogs that you did at Knesset Israel, some articles. I want to ask you about one particular phrase that you use. It comes from a blog from 2020, so it was in the middle of the pandemic. And you were talking about the phrase that we all came to know and love, social distancing. And you juxtapose that with this idea of spiritual proximity. And in reading, I said, wow, that's the linkage there, social distancing, spiritual proximity. What did you mean by that? It's a great phrase.
Well, first of all, thank you for catching it and recognizing it. I just wrote it and didn't think a whole lot about it. So I'm very glad you decided to put a spotlight on it.
I thought it's great. I thought it was a great phrase.
And, COVID, for me, like everybody else of our time, was a major challenge and had never been through anything like it. I've read about the plague in the Middle Ages, but I didn't know what that meant existentially. And it proved to be, along with my own personal health, not COVID related, but other problems, a bookend. I started off in time of 9/11, and I ended at the end of COVID with my own health problems. And it was a real bookend. The phrase itself grew out of a prior term that I used, and that had to do with what does it mean to be a rabbi in a congregation? And I talked about emotional availability. Even though I have a scholarly twist, like some rabbis are social activists, there's really just rarely a pure rabbi. He's an equal generalist in all areas. Most of us tend to have some shtick. Yours has been pastoral care, and I paid close attention to that as a model of what I thought was the right priority. And mine was to be an adult educator, confirmation, where I would try to raise everything up in the educational sphere. But I realized that as important as what came from the head, they were looking for what came from the heart. So what they wanted was emotional availability for me, so that when adult ed was over and they needed to call me aside and tell me their teenage daughter had an eating disorder and needed to talk to me or cry with me or something like that, I would really be available. And that process is that much easier when you're nose to nose with somebody. There are signals, body language, subtle things that we communicate without words that tell people we are there for you, we love you. And we may not have a magic wand, but we're there. Then comes COVID, and there's this massive, universal, physical distance between all of us. So how could I continue to provide emotional availability to my congregation? And that's where that phrase about spiritual proximity came. And then we developed Zoom services and things that literally brought the life of the synagogue, and by, as a mechanism to bring the Jewish way of life, Judaism, right into people's homes. And again, we're inches apart, but by screen. And I wanted to create as much proximity as possible, so that even if they couldn't come to the building, they felt close in an existential way. And actually, once we got it going, and the need was so great let's not forget how great that isolation was, particularly the older people. And then I realized even teenagers, that I had to work hard and be online, whether it was small groups, services, one-on-one counseling, one-on-one listening, and I strove to be proximate as best I could. And I think I got through it, and honestly, it was exhausting.
Yeah, someone will write a history, maybe you will, of the impact and the toll that the pandemic took on clergy. Because I've yet to talk to a colleague, educator, cantor, rabbi, ministers, who were just drained,
Right.
and many who had to master technology within the space of a week, maybe a day.
Right.
But now that we've gone through that, and now technology is so much a part of the American Jewish learning and worship experience, what's your take on it? You think this is here to stay, isn't it?
We're in a hybrid situation.
Mm-hmm.
And everything we do basically is hybrid, where it's both in person and online. And in a positive way, it has actually increased proximity.
Right. And it's
because
strange.
we can have these so-called intimate meetings now without getting in our cars. And I'm thinking about 80-year-olds who can't drive, but miraculously, people who were afraid of cell phones now are able to stream and to Zoom and to join groups and to do all types of things, and are actually less cut off, which means the provider has to have even more energy to meet more people, because of the electronics of proximity have increased so greatly, and the public education has grown exponentially, and we always have it available. I remember saying just before we closed our Hebrew school, I said, kids, I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but do you realize there's never going to be another weather day for Hebrew school? Because if we have to call in school off, we're coming on cell phone. I had a crazy, really experience with my confirmation class. It would have been totally unthinkable. Most of my kids showed up. The attendance rate did not diminish. It was good to begin with, thank God. But where they were was crazy. Most of them were in their beds holding their phones, and I would see the tops of heads between sheets and pillows, but they were listening to me and I was listening to them. And that was as much proximity without legal problems as you can get.
No, it's as all of us have found out, significantly and substantively changed Judaism education and the way we even relate to each other in a variety of different ways.
How we put on services, we have to think completely differently now, because just like this show, you have to think a little differently. If you and I were sitting in a room talking with 20 people in front of us, there would be some different mechanisms that we would be using to communicate to each other and with an audience. And now we have this dimension of electronic communication.
The one of the phrases that you use in many cases throughout the book is this term called Americanized Judaism. Americanized Judaism. I'm fascinated by that because in the classes that I teach, we always make the statement that I think we are in the process of creating a brand new American Judaism. It's not exportable to any other place. So I wanted to ask you what you meant by the concept when you write Americanized Judaism.
Yeah, thanks. I think from early on, in the history of the Jewish experience in America, a uniquely American expression of Judaism developed. And that was true almost across the entire religious spectrum. A lot of it had to do with the separation of church and state, the early attainment of citizenship by Jews in America. Not that there wasn't and isn't anti-Semitism, but we have attained a level of acceptance here, and even more so protection by constitutional law than anywhere else. I know people are worried right now, but reality is reality. Just compare the American experience to the German or the Spanish or the Polish. In addition to that, American Jews acculturated to a very high degree. And there is a big difference between the word acculturation and assimilation. In acculturation, you retain pieces of your original identity. In assimilation, you lose them. So by and large, American Jews have, especially the active part of the community, people who belong to synagogues or Hadassah or Federation or go to summer camps, have acculturated, and they're a blend of American culture, which is a unique culture, and Judaism, and in different generations have created a different synthesis of how those two dance partners work together. One other way of understanding this is, and let's say you go to a foreign country. I'm of the generation where if you wanted to travel, you picked France. Today, there'd be a big debate as to whether or not to go to France. There was never a question about an American tourist in France as to whether or not the French people who saw you knew you were American. They knew you were American from the way you walked, talked, ate your food. Europeans do things with knives that Americans can't, even surgeons can't imagine how to do. There's a whole culture, whether you're a cowboy from Texas or you're some kind of elite banker from New York City, that immediately defines you culturally as American. So there is an Americanized Judaism. It is very complex. It has distinctive regional characteristics. I study Southern Judaism in particular. There are denominational differences, and then there are subgroups within the denominations. But what the umbrella over all of that is what I would call America. Now, this is not going back to some classical Reform 1910 anti-Zionism, which says we are Americans first and Jews from a religious point of view only. It has nothing to do with that. This is a cultural phenomena in which we are so distinctive as human beings as being Americanized. And as Jews, we have found a way, or finding a way, constantly finding ways to negotiate American culture and Judaism, whether it's traditional Judaism or emergent Judaism that has never existed before.
So you opened the door about really right. Why I wanted to ask you about that phrase, Americanized Judaism, because there's several pieces in the book that talk about your relationship with Reform Judaism. You were raised in the movement, been active in the movement, you're a leading scholar in the movement. You say quite clearly in the book that you are a passionate lover of Reform Judaism. Then you write this paragraph. I got to quote it because I didn't memorize it. By the way, I just recently came back from my wife and I in France. You're absolutely right that there is no pretense that they knew where we came from. So this is part of, I think, of what you're talking about. You write, this is from an article from about 2019 in one of the Reform Judaism volumes. You write, quote, "Too much of contemporary Reform Judaism relies on entertainment gimmicks, short-term marketing, and a theology of customer service. It begins with sales and suffers from a deep lack of self-confidence in its own truths and history. Emotion is valued over intellectualism. Trends are valued over Reform tradition, and narcissism prevails over humility," unquote. So I would really like to ask you to unpack that, because that really pulls back the curtain on what some of us refer to sometimes as performance Judaism. So walk me through that paragraph if you can, Lance.
I'm a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, the more important side, I deeply believe in the historical necessity of Reform Judaism, that without a contemporary interpretation of the Jewish tradition, we would lose most of our people. Most of our people are not willing to be culturally isolationist, ultra-Orthodox Jews. They want both. They want America and they want Judaism, and they want them to fit together. The question is how to do that. And my feeling is that in earlier versions of Reform, whether you go into the 19th century or earlier in the 20th century, there was greater clarity as to what being Reform actually meant. There also might have been greater clarity as to what dominant culture was, even elite culture was, in America. And at present, we are struggling because we have declining numbers. Fewer people join synagogues. They stay for less time. Mixed marriages has its set of impacts on it. And the movement, instead of proceeding from a certain philosophy or even ideological definition of Reform, has become focused on marketing. And I understand that there's a huge economic need to do that. But we're always in negotiation with the general culture. And right now, in terms of balancing the left foot and the right foot on the surfboard of our negotiation, we're, in my opinion, leaning a little too hard in one direction, which is contemporary trends in American culture. And that although I grew up and was with you as a kid at Camp Harlem, then one of the UAHC camps, that you cannot campify, if that's a real word. Dr. Marcus said I should learn English before I worry about foreign languages. But you cannot campify the entire Reform movement. We attract some of the most successful people in the American Jewish community. Presidents of banks, college professors, endless doctors and lawyers who do not want trends in adolescent culture. They need a little more content. You know, it's when you're a kid, you like McDonald's. When you get a little older, it's not exactly your favorite food, either because of health or taste. And I'm not sure that we always appeal to the higher end of what we can pick from this huge smorgasbord of American culture. And we're at a balance. And some of it is connected to a need in Reform, which I understand and appreciate and even respect, to kind of bring it back to tradition so it seems a little more grounded. but it's done in a way that has a very adolescent quality to it. And it's great for kids, but it is not necessarily attractive to 50-year-olds or 60-year-olds. And I worry that on the human development scale, we're too centered on one cohort.
I know that in the work that we do at Jewish Sacred Aging, which is predominantly, obviously, with older adults, there is this real hunger, and I use that word advisedly, for substantive, what I call adult Judaism. Our professor, Larry Hoffman, Dr. Hoffman, who in one of my classes coined the phrase pediatric Judaism. And I think that's what you were talking about in that paragraph, because I just came off of another weekend with a congregation talking about all of it, and they really are searching for, I'm living very different lives. I'm in my 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Things happen, and I don't want Bubba mices. I just need to know how my tradition can speak to me and hold me and support me in these very, very different life stages. So that's why I was attracted to that paragraph, and I thank you for your answer, because I think it opens, again, a door, which also leads to another door that I wanted to ask you about, and that is your perception or opinion about the change in the rabbinate itself. HUC, our alma mater, our seminary, is undergoing significant restructuring, whatever the right word is, I don't know. How do you sense a significant change in the rabbinate right now as compared to your rabbinate? And if so, what would that be?
So like you, I came out of Baltimore in the 50s and the 60s. It was completely male dominant. I think the first woman president of a congregation was elected in Baltimore around 1959 or so. And the first great change has been sociological, that we're now somewhere near parity, if not greater than parity, between men and women in Reform Judaism, and that the role of male culture and female culture is all part of that negotiation and even swirl. And the tremendous advances have been made on the inclusion of women, but it has also included the distancing of men, which was happening anything as a function of American sociology. So I think that there have been truly profound changes in terms of who's in the pew and who's not in the pew in the Reform synagogue, or who's on Zoom and who's not on Zoom. In fact, Zoom actually allows for that 50, 60-year-old group with high professional demands to now participate in a way that maybe they weren't going to come to a Friday night service, might more readily tune into rather some higher end educational program at Wednesday at 8:00, because they don't have to get in their car. They can be in their sweats. We have this new etiquette of now running programs with eating dinner in front of us. Okay, so what? And I'm not sure the movement as a whole is giving off that signal. The changes elsewhere with HUC is, to me, a tremendous crisis that is attached to this discussion, because in the planning of sunsetting Cincinnati, there was no prior planning of real substance as to what to do with the Clow Library and its almost 1 million books and the American Jewish Archives and its 10 million documents. These are the great cultural treasuries of Reform Judaism. They're our anchor. And the fact that it was a second priority, I think sent a very damaging signal that what's important is this marketing aspect, making it fun and clapping your hands. Whereas we, as the Reform movement, became the custodians of two of the most important Jewish research and cultural institutions. I realize it sounds very elitist and very academic, but I'm thinking a congregant of mine, any congregant of mine who has some high-level position in a big business, in industry, in law, sitting in Center City, Philadelphia, is very concerned that those treasures be taken care of. It's irreplaceable, and they are collections that are essentially unparalleled in the Jewish tradition. We are the custodians of the global Jewish experience from the biblical time to the present, and we did not give off a signal that that was a priority. And to me, that makes us feel rudderless. You can't just do what's popular. I think it's great when kids stand up at services and clap and spin around to a song and they're smiling and they're with their friends. And that is very good when you're 15 years old. When you're 75 years old, it will bring a smile to your face. We ain't doing that. You want to know that HUC has manuscripts of Maimonides and that we're the real deal, that we are off. We know that we're American. Our challenge is how to be authentically Jewish. And Reform developed the resources of that authenticity. And right now they're compromised. I see they're working on it. I give them a lot of credit and I'm hopeful. But they did challenge that authenticity.
Lance, given the changes, given the restructuring, given the, as you write, the inflection moment that we're in as a movement and American Judaism, I got to ask you, now that we're a month or so away from the election, as a historian, where do you see this community as a result of the election? And I know it making prognostications may not be, except for sports, something that, it's a challenge. But you have a unique perspective as an American Jewish historian. What's your reaction? What's your take?
I actually think there's a whole nother piece to this, because you have the elections combined with what happened in Israel on October the 7th,
right?
Which is
obviously,
very complicated.
They're linked.
A very complicated set of parallel, interconnected developments, and there is the hope. Part of it was articulated by our friend and colleague Jonathan Sarna, that in addition to worrying about anti-Semitism, this could be the moment for a different kind of commitment to Jewish education from preschool to nursing homes, that we need to hold on to our tradition to keep ourselves grounded. Jews lived, I think, particularly were so heavy on the East Coast, South Florida, and LA, etc., that somehow we were so securely synthesized with the national culture. And the threat of anti-Semitism from October the 7th, the reverberations, and whatever the election itself means, shakes that confidence. And that all of a sudden, we're like other Jewish communities living on the edge. And if we're going to live on the edge and we don't have that confidence that our acculturation is accepted by the rest of society in a genuine fashion, we have to understand who we are and where we came from. So it may be, to put a positive spin on it, a real opportunity to grow, to deepen, not necessarily grow, it might shrink, but to really deepen commitment within the American Jewish community. Because if we want to stay Jewish, we're going to have to work with it. The environment, which was indifferent to us for most of the prior years, is no longer indifferent. And there are threats now. And the question is, what are we going to fill our sandbags with? We're going to fill them with Jewish content, or are we going to fill them with anti-Semitism mechanisms?
Well, so you paint a very interesting, as you write, inflection moment. And that challenge that you just posed is a good way to end, because we just don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping that we respond not out of fear, but out of a positive impact. I know that there's, as you mentioned, a renewed interest in revitalizing and restructuring Jewish education, because we do turn our children out and send them to college totally unprepared to deal with what they're dealing with in many of the campuses. But I'm heartened by the fact that so many older adults really want to delve into this and probe and question and seek some sort of rudder, some stability as to what all this means in a larger context. So I would imagine that you will be very, very busy teaching and preaching and writing around a lot of this stuff. So Lance, let me thank you. The book again, Portrait of a Reform Rabbi, Continuity and Change, available, the usual sources, Amazon bookstores. Is that correct, Lance?
Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and Abe Books and the whole slew, yeah.
If somebody wanted to connect with you and wanted to perhaps invite you to teach at a congregation or an organization, how would they do? Where would they email you?
To my email would be the easiest. It's my name in lowercase, Lance J. Sussman @gmail.com.
Lance, thank you very much. As usual, it's great to dialogue with you and to learn from you. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thanks, Richie.
Light those Hanukkah menorahs and just peace and joy with your entire family, and enjoy that new simcha too, the wedding. And just bask in some of that glow. It's really cool. So thank you again. I'll see you hopefully on Old York Road sometime or whatever.
And or book 3 when it comes out.
And definitely book 3. I'll have book 3.
Okay.
To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. If you want to comment on anything, make suggestions, please feel free to email me at rabbi@jewishsacredaging.com. If you go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, you will find a conveniently located donate button if you'd like to support our work and these podcasts. Also, please feel free to email me at that same address if you'd like to become a sponsor of one or several of these podcasts. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big thank you, as usual, to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Thank you again for joining us. Until we see each other again on the next Seekers of Meaning, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you for joining us. And in the meantime, stay safe, everybody, stay healthy, and most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom, Todah.